Welcome to Direct Quotation, Paraphrasing and Summarising, presented by the Academic Learning Centre at Central Queensland Uni. By the end of this session, you will better understand when to use direct quotation, when and how to summarise, and perhaps most importantly, when and how to paraphrase. This presentation will not tell you how to reference. Please review the section on referencing for that information, and it should also be noticed that for the purposes of this presentation, APA referencing has been used. So, what is paraphrasing? Most of the time when students are asked this question, they say it connects to words. More specifically, they say it's using somebody else's ideas, but changing the words. Let's look at an example of this approach. The student here wants to paraphrase the words in bold, and they have done so by using a dictionary or thesaurus to change the words. In their paraphrase, the word finite changes to exact, the word high to significant, and the word costs to expenditure. Can you see the problems with this translation? Finite and exact are not synonyms, and the meaning of cost is not the same as expenditure. So the student has got the wrong meaning, so the sentence does not make sense. The other problem is that this is too close to the original because the student has only actually changed 3 words, so this would still be counted even with the reference as plagiarism. So rather than thinking of paraphrasing as using somebody else's ideas and changing the words, think about it as changing the voice, using somebody else's ideas but restating it in your style, in your way, because we all communicate in a very particular manner. If we can stick to this, the assignment will not only have fewer issues with plagiarism, it will also read better because the style will be consistent. Remember though, that even though we communicate it our way, it still has to have the original meaning and the original must be referenced. So why do you need to paraphrase? Universities expect students to use a lot of evidence to support their ideas. There are 3 ways that students can legitimately present this evidence. The first is through the use of direct quotation. Let's look at this example here. The use of direct quotes and a reference shows the lecturer that the information is 100% the same as the original. It shows the lecturer you have used somebody else's work. However, even though this is honest, it doesn't actually show any understanding of the original text. It just shows that you can copy and paste appropriately with a suitable reference. So paraphrasing, on the other hand, shows your lecturer that you have processed, understood, and synthesized information from another writer into your assignment. So you can see why lecturers much prefer you to paraphrase than quote. So what do you need to paraphrase? Basically, we paraphrase anything that we use from another source that is not best communicated or is not better communicated using a direct quotation. Direct quotations do have their place in assignments, but it is only a small place with a maximum of about 5 to 10% used. There are very specific times when direct quotes can be used, and this is usually when paraphrasing changes the meaning of the original. For example, in sentences made up of unchangeable keywords, you are better using a direct quote. These can be words specific to your area of study, like human resources or diabetes, or technical words like cloud computing. These words can't be changed or the meaning is lost. Direct quotes are also sometimes better used with some definitions or part definitions, or with some theories, laws, regulations, or principles if the paraphrase changes the meaning. Sometimes it's not the meaning that changes, but the effectiveness of the sentence if we paraphrase. So we can use direct quotation for particularly powerful or controversial statements. Let's take a look at some examples of using direct quotation versus paraphrase. First of all, with definitions. Here are 2 definitions. RAM is defined as random access memory. Or the paraphrase, RAM is defined as infrequent availability recall. Which would you choose? Well, hopefully you would choose the direct quotation because the paraphrase has obviously lost its meaning and does not make sense. Sometimes with theories, using a paraphrase changes the meaning, so we're best using the direct quotation. Here is an explanation of the most famous theory in the world. Einstein's name is closely linked with the celebrated theory E = mc². Would you paraphrase this? Perhaps to Einstein is intrinsically connected with the formula E = the letter before N, the letter after B times 2? Well, I really hope not, because the paraphrase is clearly nonsensical as meaning has been lost. Finally, sometimes with powerful statements, it's best to keep them in the original. This is one of the most famous speeches ever written by Dr. Martin Luther King. The original says, "I have a dream that one day the nation will rise up." Would you paraphrase this? Perhaps to, "I have a nighttime vision that in the future the country will sort itself out." Well, again, you wouldn't paraphrase this text as it is just too powerful and too well known to change. So what do you need to paraphrase? And the answer is the majority of the evidence you use in an assignment when that evidence is not better communicated by a direct quote. These can be ideas, arguments, viewpoints, examples, case studies. A lot of theories lend themselves to paraphrase, statistics, figures, and tables. Some laws, regulations, principles can be paraphrased. Basically, anything that you are using in an assignment that you did not invent or discover yourself. So now we know what we need to paraphrase. Let's have a look at some good and poor examples of paraphrasing. By doing this, we should be able to see what we need to include in a good paraphrase. Here is the original. It's an explanation of academic culture, and it states that academic culture refers to the attitudes, values, and ways of behaving that are shared by people who work or study in universities. Take a look at student 1 and student 2's paraphrases and pause the video to think, are these paraphrases acceptable or unacceptable? Okay, so hopefully you had a minute to think. Here's the original again. Student 1 and student 2. Now student 1's is clearly unacceptable because there is no reference. The idea is not the students, they are pretending it is, so this is clear plagiarism. Student 2's would also be considered unacceptable. The student has provided a reference, so is being honest, but they have only actually changed 4 words. Attitudes to beliefs, ways to manner, there's a word of, and my favorite, in universities to at universities. This is far too similar to the original, and if you rely on this technique to paraphrase, you will have problems with plagiarism. Now let's look at 2 more examples. The original is the same, but we have 2 new paraphrases. Again, pause the video and take a look and decide if they would be acceptable or unacceptable. So again, I hope you had time to review. Student 1's is clearly unacceptable again because there is no reference. The idea is not the students, they are pretending it is, so this is clear plagiarism. Student 2, however, has produced a good paraphrase because although the meaning is the same, they have communicated it in a very different way, their way, and they have also referenced the original source. So how did student 2 produce an effective paraphrase? There are essentially 2 ways to do this, which we can call the intuitive and the systematic approach. Intuitive just means that you instinctively know how to do something. So this approach shows that you instinctively understand the content and you are able to express it in a different way. So you read the sentence until you fully understand it. Once you understand it, you close it, you don't look at it, you write down the meaning in your own voice. However, if you do not understand the meaning of the text, never attempt to paraphrase it, as it will be so clear to your lecturer that you do not understand what you are trying to paraphrase. If you do understand it, you write it, you check your paraphrase with the original. If it is suitably different, reference it and use it. However, sometimes, even though you think you've paraphrased well, it is still too similar, and in this case, you need to rewrite it. This is when a more systematic or step-by-step approach can be useful. When you understand the meaning of a text, but you just can't quite paraphrase it, try to follow these steps. Circle the words which must be included in your paraphrase, as without these words, the meaning will be lost. Then underline the words which you think can be changed. In the example we looked at before, I have decided that I only need to keep 2 key words, academic culture and universities, but the rest I think I can potentially change. Now I can start to think about ways I can change those words. Students always think about synonyms, and these can be useful. But as well as synonyms, don't forget about antonyms. Antonyms are opposite words, and these can change the flavor of a sentence by making a positive sentence negative. For example, Sydney is expensive. The antonym is cheap, so we can say Sydney is not cheap. Sometimes we can explain a concept instead of defining it. For example, companies benefit from the use of secondary data. We can explain what secondary data is. Companies need to use information from surveys and written and non-written documentary sources. This paraphrase is very different now to the original. Restructuring a sentence is a very useful technique. So maybe the subject becomes the object of the sentence, or vice versa. Or maybe you just change the order of the parts of the sentence. You just change the order of certain words. This can often have the effect of changing the voice from active to passive. For example, Jones tested the samples under various conditions. If we switch the subject order, we could say the samples were tested, but then we can change to use our synonyms, the samples were investigated in several different ways. We can also change the word form. For example, we can change from noun to noun. So we might say marketers instead of marketing. Academic writing likes the gerund or the ing form of a noun. So you might be able to change from the infinitive to the gerund. For example, it is expensive to live in Sydney. The infinitive, you can change to the gerund, living in Sydney, and then change the rest. Living in Sydney incurs great costs. Or you can change a verb to a noun. Management need to decide. To decide is a verb. Change it to a noun to decisions, and you could write decisions have to be made. Finally, you can use different types of sentences. Maybe make a long sentence shorter, or use different joining words. Because is a joining word. People put on weight because of a high-calorie diet. But if you switch it and use a different joining word, you could write as a result, joining word, as a result of high-calorie intake, weight increases. So you can see that there are many more ways to paraphrase, not just the use of synonyms. So let's go back to the earlier example that we said was a good paraphrase and have a look and see if you can identify any of the techniques we just talked about that this student has used to make this paraphrase. So again, pause the video and see if you can work out how did this student do it. Okay, so first the student has changed the subject and the object. In the original, academic culture was the subject, but in the paraphrase, it becomes the object. They've also changed the object, people who work or study, into the subject, employees and students. Because they've changed the subject, it means that they have had to use a different verb, possess, and then a different complement, which is the rest of the sentence, with different synonyms. So instead of values, you've got similar belief systems, and instead of ways of behaving, we have behavioral traits. The link between the new subject and the object has now changed to which. And finally, the student has explained a concept. Instead of stating people who work or study, they've explained who work or study in universities as employees and students. So you can see that this student has changed the original into a paraphrase by using several effective techniques. So now we have what we think is an appropriate paraphrase. You just need to check it against the original again and make sure you have recorded the full reference. So if you use the paraphrase in your assignment, you know exactly where it is from. Another technique to incorporate a source into your assignment is to summarize. Summarizing has some differences with paraphrasing. Summarizing is used to reduce a text to its main ideas, and the summary can come from the main idea in a book chapter, or a journal article, or a passage. Whereas paraphrasing is the main idea from a much smaller section of text. These can be sentences within paragraphs. Unlike paraphrasing, which explores ideas in great detail, a summary is an overview of a text. So because it is an overview, it is much shorter than the original, whereas paraphrasing is approximately the same number of words. They are, however, both similar in the fact that they both need a reference and they are both required to be written in your voice. Here is an example of a paragraph that I want to summarize. I want to summarize this paragraph because it helps me to answer a question on what students need to complete university assignments. I don't need all of the information in this paragraph, so I highlight the main ideas that I want to use. These are the ideas in purple. I think students need to know how to identify tone, assemble ideas, use critical thinking and writing skills, and why, so that they can enter an academic debate. I can therefore delete all of the information in red. These are examples or explanations, and I just don't need them in my summary. So let's take a look at the summary. You'll notice that most of this is in my voice, but I have kept some of the technical terms, for example, tone, critical thinking, and writing skills. I've used a reporting verb, suggests, to introduce the ideas in the text. And I've used a reference, this time with page numbers, as the summarized material appears in a specific page of a book. So you can see that my summary is much shorter than the original and is really used to answer that question, what does student need to write in an academic way? So just to recap, when we summarize, use only the main point, take out examples and explanations, use your voice or your style to explain it, keep technical terms, use reporting verbs such as suggests, and reference the page numbers that you have used to produce your summary. Please remember that direct quotation should not be used too much and only in particular circumstances when if you paraphrase, the meaning is lost. Lecturers much prefer paraphrasing and summarizing, but this is much more than just changing a few words. It is about expressing somebody else's idea using your voice. Now to do that, you need to use different techniques such as changing the structure of a sentence. Once you have completed the paraphrase, check the original, make sure it is not too similar. Make sure you have referenced the direct quote, paraphrase, or summary. It is not your work, so you must reference it or you will be committing plagiarism. And finally, take your time. Take your time to understand the idea, take your time to process the idea, and take your time to communicate that idea in your way. Don't forget that the ALC is available to help with paraphrasing and summarizing, but more than that, we can also check your assignments and answer quick queries. We can do this on campus, just come down, make an appointment, or we can do this online. Happy writing!